They mistook his silence for weakness. Matt Roloff and Karen Chandler thought they could walk all over Chris Marek. They thought he was just Amy's husband, a passive observer, happy to ride in the passenger seat of the Roloff family drama. They were dead wrong. While Matt was busy building his dream home and Corinne was planning her retirement in Arizona, Chris was quietly building a case. We have obtained exclusive details on the revenge plot that Chris Marek executed with military precision. He didn't just find the evidence, he baited the trap that Karen Chandler walked right into. For years, viewers have screamed at their televisions, wondering when someone would finally outsmart the power players of Roloff Farms. Today is that day. The nice guy finishes first, and according to new insider reports, Corinne might be finishing her sentence behind bars. This is the story of how Chris Marek went from background character to the lead detective in the biggest scandal to ever hit Little People Big World. Before we open the files and reveal exactly what Chris found in that thick binder he took to the authorities, I need you to do one thing. If you want justice for Amy and you want to see the truth about Roloff Farms finally exposed, hit that like button right now. Let's get this video to 10,000 likes to show TLC that we know the truth. And if you haven't already, subscribe to LPBW Update and turn on notifications. We are the only channel brave enough to report what the cameras refuse to show. Do it now, because what I'm about to tell you changes everything. To understand how this takedown happened, you have to remember who Chris Marek really is. For seasons, the show has painted him as the nice, mild-mannered realtor who just wants everyone to get along. But that title, realtor, is the key. Chris isn't a farmer, and he isn't a reality star. He is a seasoned real estate professional. He deals in contracts, property, law, escrow, and financial audits for a living. He knows exactly what a legitimate business ledger looks like, and more importantly, he knows what money laundering looks like. While Matt Roloff prides himself on being a chaotic visionary, constantly starting projects he can't finish, Chris operates in a world of black and white facts. The narrative begins on a rainy Tuesday in Hillsborough. According to sources close to the family, Amy was stressed about a routine tax audit. She was scrambling to organize old documents from the years leading up to the final sale of her portion of the farm. Being the supportive husband he is, Chris offered to help her sort through the boxes of financial records that had been collecting dust in the garage. It was supposed to be a simple afternoon of filing receipts. But as Chris was flipping through a stack of vendor payments from the peak pumpkin season 3 years ago, his trained eye caught something. It was a recurring payment to a company called CMC Logistics. At first glance, it looked like any other vendor. Farms have high overhead. They pay for seeds, equipment, seasonal labor, and consulting. But Chris paused. He stared at the invoice. The amount was staggering. $15,000 a month, billed for consulting services and logistical management. Chris knows the farm operations inside and out. He has spent countless hours there. He knows the pumpkin patch crew. He knows the guys who run the mule wagons, and he knows the office staff. He had never heard of CMC Logistics. There were no consultants walking around the farm wearing badges, and there were no outside logistics teams managing the crowds. Most people would have shrugged it off as just another reckless Matt Roloff expense. But Chris Marek got a feeling in the pit of his stomach. The dates on the invoices coincided perfectly with the months where Matt was claiming poverty, telling Amy that the farm's cash flow was too tight to buy her out at a fair price. Chris didn't say a word to Amy in that moment. He knew that if he raised a false alarm, it would only cause her more pain and anxiety. She had moved on, or so she thought, but Chris realized that if someone was draining the farm's accounts, it directly impacted Amy's residual payouts and the inheritance of the grandchildren. He decided right then and there to start a quiet investigation. He waited until Amy went to bed that night. He sat at his laptop, the glow of the screen illuminating a face that was no longer smiling. He pulled up the Oregon Secretary of State business registry. He searched for CMC Logistics. Nothing. He searched for variants of the name. Nothing. This was the first major red flag. A company billing nearly $200,000 a year to a high-profile farm should have a registered agent in the state of operation. But then Chris expanded his search. He remembered that Corinne Chandler had deep ties to Arizona. Long before she and Matt bought their vacation home there, he switched his search to the Arizona Corporation Commission, and there it was, CMC Logistics. But it wasn't a logistics company. The filing listed it as a sole proprietorship for lifestyle management and consulting. And the registered agent, a generic lawyer based in Phoenix. But Chris dug deeper, paying the small fees to access the detailed filing history. Buried in the initial incorporation documents was a P.O. box listed as the primary mailing address. Chris opened a separate tab and pulled up Google Maps. He typed in the address of the vacation home that Matt and Corinne had purchased. He then mapped the distance to the P.O. box. It was less than 2 miles away. The zip codes matched. The pieces were starting to come together, but Chris is a professional. He knows that a coincidence isn't proof in a court of law. He needed to follow the money. He needed to see who was authorizing these checks and where the money was actually going. But he had a problem. He didn't have access to the current farm computers. The relationship with Matt was friendly, but it wasn't here are my passwords friendly. Chris needed a way in. The opportunity presented itself 2 weeks later. Zach and Tori were out of town, and there was a mix-up regarding some equipment being stored in the big barn. Matt called Chris, asking if he could swing by and help move some old staging gear because Matt's back was acting up. It was the perfect Trojan horse. Chris agreed immediately, putting on his helpful neighbor persona. He drove over to the farm, greeting Matt with a handshake and a smile. They moved the gear, and afterward, Matt suggested they grab a water in the farm office. This was the moment Chris had been waiting for. As they sat in the office, the phone rang. It was Corinne calling Matt from Arizona. Matt got distracted, pacing around the room, arguing about patio furniture. While Matt's back was turned, Chris glanced at the desktop computer. It was unlocked. QuickBooks was open on the screen. His heart hammered in his chest. He knew he had maybe 30 seconds. He leaned forward, his hand hovering over the mouse. He quickly filtered the vendor list for CMC Logistics. The screen populated with dozens of entries, but it was the details that made Chris's blood run cold. The approval stamps on the digital invoices weren't from Matt. They were initialed CC. Corinne Chandler was approving invoices for her own shell company. This was textbook embezzlement. This was a direct conflict of interest. But then Chris saw something even worse. He clicked on the memo section of one of the transactions. There was a note attached to a particularly large transfer of $25,000. The note read, Asset Depreciation Adjustment Fund Transfer. Chris realized in that split second that this wasn't just about greed. This was about sabotage. By funneling cash out of the farm and into this fake vendor account, they were artificially lowering the farm's net income. Why would they do that? To devalue the business. If the business looks less profitable on paper, the value of the shares drops. This was calculated to ensure that when they negotiated buyouts with the kids or with Amy, the price would be rock bottom. They were stealing from the Roloff legacy to fund their retirement in the sun. Matt hung up the phone and turned back around. Chris snapped back into his chair, taking a sip of water, his hand shaking slightly. He had seen the smoking gun, but he couldn't take the computer. He needed hard evidence. He needed a copy. He asked Matt if he could print a receipt for some gas money since he used his truck to haul the gear. Matt, unsuspecting and distracted, waved him toward the printer. Yeah, go ahead, use the machine. Chris didn't print a gas receipt. He inserted a small USB drive he had kept in his pocket for weeks, just hoping for this chance. In a flurry of keystrokes, he exported the last 5 years of transaction history and the email archives associated with the vendor accounts. The progress bar crawled across the screen. Matt was talking about the Newhouse Foundation, completely oblivious that his buddy, Chris, was digitally stripping him bare. The download finished. Chris yanked the drive, slipped it into his pocket, and stood up. "Thanks, Matt. Printer's out of paper, but don't worry about the gas. It's on me." Chris drove away from the farm that day with the evidence burning a hole in his pocket. He didn't go home. He drove to a coffee shop 2 towns over, finding a corner booth where he wouldn't be recognized. He plugged the drive into his laptop and began to sift through the emails he had captured. This is where the story turns from financial fraud to personal betrayal. The emails revealed the depth of Corinne's manipulation. There were exchanges between Corinne and the registered agent in Arizona discussing how to layer the payments so they wouldn't trigger IRS flags. But the most damning evidence was a draft email Corinne had written to Matt but never sent, or perhaps she delivered the message in person. The draft outlined a plan titled Operation Clean Slate. It detailed a strategy to make the pumpkin season look chaotic and expensive, justifying the high costs of outside consultants. It mocked Amy's lack of business knowledge with a line that made Chris grit his teeth. She'll never look at the P&L statements, she just looks at the bank balance. As long as the checks don't bounce, she won't know we're bleeding the beast dry. Chris Marek sat in that coffee shop staring at the words bleeding the beast dry. This was the woman who smiled in their faces at family gatherings. This was the woman who claimed she wanted peace for the family. Chris realized that he couldn't just expose this to Amy. It would break her heart, yes, but legally, they needed to be smarter. If they went to the police now with stolen data, it might be inadmissible. He needed Karen to incriminate herself. He needed to catch her in the act of a cover-up. He went home and acted like nothing had happened. He kissed Amy, asked about her day, and cooked dinner. But behind his eyes, a plan was forming. He knew that the only way to nail Corinne was to make her panic. He needed to make her think that the walls were closing in, forcing her to make a sloppy mistake. Chris Marek was about to initiate a game of psychological warfare. The following week, Chris suggested a double date. He told Amy he wanted to smooth things over with Matt and Corinne before the next pumpkin season started. Amy was hesitant, but Chris insisted. Keep your friends close and your enemies closer, he thought, though he told Amy, it's just for the sake of the grandkids. They invited Matt and Corinne over for a barbecue at their place. The evening started cordially enough. There was wine, there was talk of the weather in the new build. Chris played the role of the gracious host perfectly. He laughed at Matt's jokes. He complimented Corinne's outfit. But as they sat down for dinner, Chris dropped the first crumb of his trap. "You know," Chris said casually, slicing a piece of steak, "Amy and I have been looking at our estate planning. We're thinking of hiring a forensic accountant just to do a deep dive on everything, purely for tax purposes. Finalize the old farm years so we never have to think about it again." The silence that fell over the table was deafening. Chris didn't look at Matt. He kept his eyes locked on Corinne. He watched the color drain from her face. She set her wine glass down a little too hard. "A forensic accountant?" she asked, her voice tight. "Is that really necessary? It sounds expensive." "Oh, it's worth it for peace of mind," Chris replied, smiling with the warmth of a shark. "These guys are amazing. They can find a penny missing from 10 years ago. They trace everything. Shell companies, hidden assets, duplicate invoices. It's fascinating technology." Corinne choked on her water. Matt tried to intervene, blustering about how their books were messy but honest, but Corinne was already checking out. She was tapping furiously on her phone under the table. Chris knew exactly who she was texting. She was likely messaging her lawyer or perhaps accessing the bank accounts to move money. The trap was set. Chris knew that a criminal's first instinct when threatened is to destroy the evidence. The dinner ended abruptly. Corinne claimed she had a sudden migraine and needed to go home. As they drove away, Amy turned to Chris and said, "That was weird, right? Karen seemed so on edge." Chris just squeezed her hand. "Maybe she just didn't like the steak," he said. But he knew the truth. He knew that Karen wasn't going home to sleep. She was going to the farm office. What Karen didn't know was that Chris had anticipated this. During his visit to move the gear, when he was left alone in the office for those brief moments, he hadn't just downloaded files. He had installed a tiny motion-activated trail camera on the top shelf of the bookshelf, disguised between two binders. It was a simple security device, battery-operated, intended for hunters, but perfect for catching a predator. It pointed directly at the shredder and the file cabinets. Chris checked his phone. The trail cam app alerted him to movement in the farm office at 11:45 p.m. He opened the live feed. The video was grainy, illuminated by the harsh fluorescent lights of the office. There was Corinne Chandler. She wasn't wearing her dinner clothes anymore. She was in a tracksuit, looking frantic. She was pulling binders off the shelves, specifically the ones from 2018 and 2019. She was ripping pages out and feeding them into the industrial shredder. Chris watched in silence as she destroyed the physical copies of the invoices he had already downloaded digitally. But then she did something that sealed her fate. She opened the safe. Chris held his breath. He didn't know the combination, and he assumed only Matt did. But Karen punched in the code without hesitation. She pulled out a stack of cash in a black ledger book that Chris hadn't seen before. She stuffed them into a canvas tote bag. This was it. This wasn't just accounting errors. This was grand larceny and obstruction of justice. She was destroying evidence after being tipped off about a potential audit. Chris hit the record button on his screen, saving the footage directly to his cloud storage. He had the digital trail, he had the emails, and now he had video proof of the cover-up. He didn't sleep that night. He spent the next 48 hours compiling the Marek dossier. He printed the emails, he highlighted the bank transfers, he burned the video footage onto a secure drive. He organized it all into a timeline that told a clear, undeniable story of greed and deception. He wasn't going to take this to Matt. Matt was either complicit or too incompetent to handle it. Chris was going straight to the district attorney. The morning he walked into the police station was the turning point. Witnesses say Chris looked calm, almost relaxed. He wasn't the reality star anymore. He was a citizen doing his duty. He requested to speak with the fraud division. He laid the binder on the desk. "I'm not here to file a complaint," he reportedly said. "I'm here to report a crime in progress." The authorities took the evidence seriously. The dollar amounts involved crossed the threshold into felony territory. And because the money was moving across state lines from Oregon to the Arizona Shell Company, it had the potential to involve federal agencies. The FBI investigates wire fraud, and that is exactly what Chris had uncovered. 2 days later, the raid happened. It wasn't the dramatic SWAT team raid you see in movies, but it was just as effective. Unmarked cars pulled up the long driveway of Roloff Farms. Officers in plain clothes stepped out. Matt was on his mule, supervising a project. He rode over, looking confused. When they presented the warrant, Matt reportedly turned bright red. He tried to argue, telling them to get off his property, claiming it was a misunderstanding. But the warrant wasn't for the property. It was for the person. Karen was in the main house. When the officers asked her to step outside, the color left her face for the second time that week. They confiscated her phone and her laptop. They asked her to open the safe, the same safe she had raided nights before. When they found it empty of the cash and ledger, they asked her where the contents were. Her silence was the loudest admission of guilt. Meanwhile, Chris had to do the hardest part of his plan. He had to tell Amy. He sat her down in their living room. He held her hands. "Amy, there's something going on at the farm, and it's bad, but I handled it. He laid out everything: the fake company, the stolen money, the plan to devalue her share. Amy listened, tears streaming down her face. She wasn't crying for the money. She was crying because she felt foolish, because she had trusted these people to at least be honest in business. But then she looked at Chris. She realized what he had done. He had protected her when she couldn't protect herself. He had walked into the lion's den and come out with the truth. News of the investigation leaked to the press almost immediately. Insider reports began circulating on social media about a massive fraud scandal at a beloved reality TV farm. But the mainstream outlets were afraid to touch it without official charges. That's where we come in. We know the timeline. We know about the trail cam. And we know that Karen Chandler has been advised by her legal team not to leave the state of Oregon. But the story doesn't end with the raid. The aftermath has created a power vacuum that no one expected. Matt Roloff is isolated. His girlfriend is facing potential prison time. His finances are frozen pending a forensic audit, and his credibility is destroyed. Who is left to pick up the pieces? Who is the only person with a clean record, a real estate license, and the trust of the family? Chris Marek. In a twist of fate that no scriptwriter could have come up with, the court may appoint a temporary trustee to oversee the farm's operations while the investigation is ongoing. And sources suggest that Chris Marek is at the top of the list. Imagine that. The man they ignored, the man they mocked, might end up running Roloff Farms. This is the hero arc we have been waiting for. Chris Marek didn't seek revenge out of spite. He sought justice. He proved that you don't need to be the loudest person in the room to be the most dangerous. He played the long game, and he won. Now, I have to ask you, do you think Matt was in on the CMC logistics scam, or was Corinne stealing from him too? Was Matt the mastermind, or the victim of a honey trap? And does Chris deserve an apology from every fan who called him boring? He just saved the legacy. Let me know what you think in the comments below. And listen, we are currently trying to get our hands on the full text message logs that Chris intercepted during that dinner. If this video hits 10,000 likes, you wanted the truth and you made your voices heard. We promised that if the demand was there, we would open the Marek files and reveal the specific evidence that brought the Roloff dynasty to its knees. The response has been overwhelming. It is clear that fans are tired of the edited narratives and the producer-driven storylines. You want to know what really happened on that fateful night when Chris Marek baited the trap. We are now releasing the exclusive timeline of the intercepted text messages and the fallout that is tearing the family apart behind closed doors. This is the smoking gun that authorities are currently using to build their case against Karen Chandler. Buckle up, because the contents of these messages prove that this wasn't just a financial crime. It was a calculated conspiracy to destroy the relationships between Matt and his children to secure a payday for Karen. The timeline begins at 7:14 p.m. on the night of the dinner party, right after Chris Marek dropped the bombshell about hiring a forensic accountant. While Matt was distracted pouring more wine, Corinne excused herself to the restroom. But she didn't go to the restroom. According to digital forensic logs recovered by Chris, she went to the hallway and sent an encrypted message to a number registered in Scottsdale, Arizona. The text read, "Code Red, they are bringing in auditors. We need to purge the 2019 logs tonight. M is clueless, but the realtor knows something." This single text message changes everything. It confirms two things. First, that M, Matt Roloff, was kept in the dark about the extent of the fraud. And second, that Corinne viewed Chris not as a friend, but as a threat. The realtor she refers to is Chris, and she underestimated him. At 7:22 p.m., she received a reply from her contact, likely the registered agent of the fake CMC logistics company. The reply was chillingly brief. "Do not panic. Is the server physical or cloud-based? If it's physical, it needs to disappear. If M finds out, we are both done. Corinne replied instantly, "It's on the drive in the safe. I'm going there tonight. Stall the transfer." This exchange proves premeditation. This wasn't a mistake. It was a cover-up, but the timeline gets even darker. At 8:45 p.m., as Chris and Amy were walking Matt and Corinne to their car, Corinne sent a text to Matt's phone, even though he was standing right next to her. Why? To create a digital alibi. She texted, "Matt, I'm feeling terrible, going straight to bed. You should stay up and work on the house plans. Don't worry about me." She was setting the stage. She wanted Matt to be occupied in the big house so she could sneak into the farm office undetected. She was manipulating the man she claimed to love so she could rob him blind. But she didn't know Chris was watching. The fallout from these revelations has rippled outward to the rest of the Roloff family, and suddenly, years of confusing drama make perfect sense. We have to talk about Zach and Tori. For the last 2 seasons, fans have been heartbroken watching the estrangement between Zach and his father. We were told it was about a negotiation gone bad. We were told Zach felt disrespected, but we never got the numbers. Now, thanks to Chris's investigation, we know why the deal fell apart. Sources close to Zach indicate that during the farm negotiations, Karen was the one whispering in Matt's ear. She was the one who insisted on an inflated market value for the north side. Why would she do that? Because she knew Zach couldn't afford the inflated price. She needed the sale to fail so the land would remain an asset of the farm, an asset she was actively draining value from through her shell company. If Zach bought the land, he would have audited the books immediately. He would have seen the payments to CMC Logistics. Karen sabotaged Zach's dream of owning the farm, not because she hated him, but because he was a liability to her scheme. When Chris approached Zach with this evidence, the reaction was explosive. Reports say Zach broke down in tears, finally realized that his father wasn't just being stubborn, he was being played. This has completely shifted the family dynamic. Zach and Jeremy, who have been distant for years, were seen meeting at a neutral location last week. The common enemy has united the brothers. They are reportedly discussing a joint lawsuit against Corinne Chandler for alienation of affection and fraud, arguing that she intentionally poisoned their relationship with their father for financial gain. But where does this leave Matt Roloff? This is the most tragic part of the story. Matt is a man who prides himself on being in control, on being the boss. To find out that he has been the puppet is a blow he may never recover from. Since the raid, Matt has been holed up in his unfinished dream home. Insiders say he is in a state of shock. He defended Karen for years. He chose her over his wife. He alienated his children for her. And now the evidence suggests she was siphoning $15,000 a month from his legacy. Matt's legal team is currently in overdrive. They are trying to separate Matt's liability from Karen's. They are painting a narrative that Matt is the primary victim. However, the district attorney might not buy it. As the owner of the business, Matt had a fiduciary duty to know where the money was going. Ignorance is not a defense in the eyes of the IRS. Unless Matt testifies against Corinne, unless he takes the stand and admits he was fooled, he could be facing charges of gross negligence or accessory to fraud. And what about Corinne? She has gone silent. No social media posts, no public appearances. Her legal team is likely trying to cut a deal. But Chris Marek has made that very difficult by handing over the video footage of her shredding documents. He removed her ability to plead clerical error. That video is proof of obstruction of justice, which carries a prison sentence all on its own, regardless of the fraud charges. There is also a theory circulating that Chris Marek is orchestrating a hostile takeover of the farm, but in the most benevolent way possible. With Matt incapacitated by legal woes and Corinne out of the picture, the farm needs a leader. Amy has no desire to return to the chaos, but she wants the asset preserved for the grandkids. Chris steps in as the perfect neutral party. He has the business acumen, he has the trust of the kids, and he has the clean hands. Imagine the upcoming season of Little People, Big World. It won't be about pumpkin season logistics or arguments over a sandbox. It will be a courtroom drama. It will be the trial of the century. And sitting in the gallery watching justice be served will be Chris Marek, the man who sat silently in the background for years, gathering intel, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. We are hearing rumors that TLC cameras were actually rolling during the initial confrontation between Chris and Matt, but the producers are terrified to air it because of the pending litigation. They are sitting on the most explosive footage in reality TV history. But don't worry, we have sources on the production crew who are leaking details to us daily. There is one more piece of evidence that has just come to light, something Chris found in the deleted items folder of the farm computer. It was a folder titled Exit Strategy. Inside were real estate listings for luxury condos in Mexico and a drafted resignation letter from the farm operations dated for next month. Corinne wasn't just stealing, she was planning to run. She was going to cash out, leave Matt with the crumbling farm and the angry kids, and vanish to the beach. Chris caught her just in time. The question now is, what will the judge do? Will Corinne turn on Matt to save herself? Will she claim that Matt told her to set up the fake company to hide money from Amy during the divorce settlement? If she plays that card, this becomes a mutually assured destruction scenario. Matt goes down, Corinne goes down, and the farm is seized by the state to pay back taxes. This is why Chris is the hero. He is the only one trying to stop the bleeding before the patient dies. He is trying to salvage what's left of the Roloff fortune for the sake of Jackson, Ember, Lila, and the rest of the grandchildren. We are monitoring the court docket in Washington County every single hour. As soon as the arraignment date is set, we will be there. But we need your help to keep this investigation alive. The mainstream media is trying to bury this story to protect the network. Do not let them. Share this video on Facebook, on Twitter, on Reddit. Tag TLC and demand the unedited footage. And there is still one loose thread we are pulling on. Who is the consultant in Arizona? Who is the person Corinne was texting? We have a lead that suggests it might be a former producer of the show who was fired 3 years ago. If the call is coming from inside the house, this conspiracy goes deeper than anyone imagined. I am working on verifying the identity of the accomplice right now. If I get the confirmation, I will drop a video with their name and photo. You do not want to miss that reveal. Make sure you are subscribed. Justice is coming to Roloff Farms, and it's wearing a button-down shirt and driving a sensible truck. Chris Marek, we salute you. Stay tuned.